When I look back now, at 71 years old, settled into the quiet rhythm of my mornings on this land, I can still feel the exact moment everything shifted beneath my feet. It wasn't Everett's death that did it, though that heartbreak cracked me open in ways I'm still learning to name. No, the true earthquake came afterward, when the veil he'd held so carefully over his past finally slipped from my hands and revealed the battlefield I'd just inherited. Everett Whitford and I had been married for 27 years. Steady years. Never dramatic, never chaotic, just two middle-aged people building a life in modest comfort in a suburb outside Duluth, Minnesota. I taught English at the local high school. He worked as an engineer for a construction firm, the kind of man who never raised his voice, never made demands, never once showed the world an unguarded edge. Except once.
Marlene, promise me you will never go to the ranch.
He said it the night before our 5th anniversary. We were lying in bed half asleep, the window cracked open so the spring breeze could curl through the room. He spoke the words so suddenly, so firmly, that I sat up straight as though he'd shouted. He didn't repeat himself, didn't explain, didn't soften it with a joke. He just waited until I whispered yes. I dismissed it as an old wound, one that didn't need reopening. I never pressed. Maybe I should have. Maybe I shouldn't have. But marriage is built on the promises you choose to keep, and I chose to keep that one. Until the day it kept me.
Everett's heart attack came on a Tuesday morning.
He was drinking coffee at the kitchen counter, reading a magazine without even turning on the lights yet. I remember hearing the mug hit the floor before he did. The doctors told me it was quick. They meant to comfort me, I suppose. But nothing about losing the person who built your life with you feels quick.
It feels like the world remembering how to break you.
2 weeks later, I sat in a walnut-paneled office smelling faintly of old books and lemon furniture polish. Across from me sat Mr. Norris, Everett's attorney, thin, silver-haired, and wearing one of those bow ties that seemed permanently affixed to the man's personality. He guided me through the legal necessities with practiced gentleness until his voice shifted slightly, drawing my attention back from the fog I'd been drifting through. "There is one more matter, Mrs.
Whitford."
He slid a small wooden box across the desk. Inside was something that did not belong in the quiet, predictable life I thought Everett and I had shared. A brass key, tarnished with age. Attached to it was a leather tag stamped with a name I'd never heard in my life.
Silver Ridge Ranch, Gallatin County, Montana.
Beneath the key rested an envelope addressed in Everett's unmistakably neat handwriting, "For Marlene when the time comes." My fingers trembled as I opened it. "My dearest Marlene," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I've failed to outrun the clock I hoped to outsmart."
I had to stop, breathe, steady myself.
Everett had been a man of few words. Seeing so many of them poured onto a page for me felt like holding something alive. He wrote about a place he'd fled at 18 and swore never to set foot on again. A place he bought back 3 years ago. A place he'd spent countless weekends secretly restoring, apparently while I believed he was traveling for work. He wrote about fear. Not fear of the land, but fear of the men tied to it. His brothers. The ones he never mentioned beyond a vague, dismissive, "we don't talk." He wrote about wanting to leave something behind for mesomathing meaningful, something he'd built with his own hands. And then, at the very end, he lifted the ban he'd once sworn me to.
"Go there, Marlene.
Just once.
You'll understand everything." I sat in silence, the key heavy in my palm, the truth heavier in my chest.
"A property in Montana?" I finally whispered. He never even liked traveling.
"Mr.
Norris cleared his throat. He paid cash. Taxes are prepaid for 5 years. And the land has increased significantly in value recently. Value? It's a ranch. He hesitated.
Oil, Mrs. Whitford.
There were discoveries in that region last year.
Oil.
My quiet, steady Everett had owned oil land and never breathed a word. By the time I left the office, grief had been replaced by something else entirely: determination, sharp and unmistakable. Whatever Everett had kept hidden all those years, I needed to face it with my own eyes. Even if it meant breaking the version of him I thought I knew. 2 days later, I was driving through the rugged beauty of southwestern Montana, past miles of pine forests and snow-tipped peaks, until the mountains finally opened to a valley so breathtaking I almost forgot why I was there. At the end of a long gravel road stood a set of restored wooden gates with an iron sign arching overhead.
Silver Richer Ranch. Not abandoned.
Not broken. Not haunted by the darkness he'd implied. It was magnificent. The brass key turned smoothly in the lock, and when I stepped through, the shock nearly took me to my knees. Everett had rebuilt the place. Completely. The farmhouse, the barns, the fencing, every inch was renewed with intention.
Love.
Care.
Inside, the great room stole the breath from my lungs.
Not because of the vaulted ceiling or the stone fireplace, but because of what lined the walls. Paintings of horses.
Sculptures.
Photographs. A gallery of beauty for a woman who once dreamed of training horses before life took her in another direction. Everett had filled the entire house with pieces of me. On a desk sat a laptop. On top of it, a single fresh rose. But before I could move, before I could even cry the tears demanding to be cried, I heard the rumbling crunch of tires on gravel. I turned toward the window.
A black SUV rolled up the drive.
3 men stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, and carrying the same sharp jaw Everett had. Their eyes scanned the property with a sense of ownership that chilled me. They walked toward the porch like they belonged there.
Everett's brothers. Men I had never met.
Men he had kept from me. Men who clearly hadn't come to offer condolences. They had come for the ranch now. And from the way they moved, I understood in an instant that whatever battle Everett had outrun all his life, it had just become mine. I swear, even now, so many years later, I can still feel the pounding of my heart that evening, the strange primal instinct that told me I had just stepped into a story Everett had tried his entire adult life to outrun. But I didn't run. I couldn't. I was standing in the home he had secretly rebuilt for me, and that meant I had to face whatever ghosts came with it. When the 3 men approached the porch, I closed the front door quietly, turned the lock, and stepped back. Their shadows crossed the frosted glass, tall and unwavering. One of them, the eldest, judging by the silver at his temples, knocked with the calm of someone who believed he owned whatever stood on the other side.
Mrs. Whitford, we know you, in there. We need to talk.
Hearing my married name in a stranger's voice sent a tremor through me. My mind traveled back to every moment Everett had hesitated when conversations drifted toward Montana, every question he'd redirected with a soft smile and a change of subject.
I had mistaken silence for peace.
It had really been fear. I didn't answer them. Instead, I backed deeper into the great room, my gaze drawn again to the silver laptop waiting patiently on the desk by the wide window. Something about that laptop felt intentional, placed, staged, prepared. As if Everett had known I'd find it at exactly this moment. The brothers kept knocking, their tone shifting from firm to irritated, then to something almost accusatory. I ignored every sound. Everett had warned me without words. These men were not my allies. I reached the desk, lifted the rose laying across the laptop lid, and opened the computer. The screen glowed to life, and immediately a password prompt appeared. Underneath the box, in Everett's handwriting, was a tiny instruction on a sticky note.
The day we met and your maiden name. My breath caught.
Who remembers a first meeting date after 27 years? Only Everett would. I typed it in. The screen opened to a single folder. For Marlene.
My fingers shook as I clicked.
Inside were hundreds of video files, each labeled with a date. The earliest was 2 weeks after his funeral. The latest was dated a full year into the future. My mouth went dry. He had planned this. Not on a whim. Not in panic. Carefully. Thoughtfully. Methodically. This was Everett's mind laid bare on a hard drive. I clicked the first file. And then I saw him. Not the pale, tired Everett who left me too soon, but a younger, stronger version of the man I loved. His smile, the crooked one he only used around me, pulled me back in time.
My knees almost buckled. Hello, Marlene.
If you're watching this, then I'm not there to hold your hand, and I hate that more than anything. I covered my mouth with trembling fingers. There he was speaking to me from a world he no longer lived in. I know you're probably furious right now, he continued. And you have every right to be.
I hid things from you.
I wish I'd been braver about the truth. Outside, the brothers' voices faded briefly, replaced by the low rumble of a phone call. One of them must have stepped away to make demands or threats. But none of that mattered, not now, not when Everett was here on my screen telling me the things he never dared say aloud. I was diagnosed 3 years ago, he said quietly. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. The same condition that took my father. The doctors gave me anywhere between 2 to 5 years. I felt the air leave my lungs. My husband had known he was dying and lived every day pretending he was fine for me. I didn't tell you because his voice broke slightly. Because I didn't want our last years together to be soaked in fear. I didn't want you watching me fade. He cleared his throat, the way he used to when emotions made him uncomfortable. So I did the only thing that made sense to me. I built something for you.
Something lasting. Something beautiful.
Something to hold you when I no longer could. He leaned closer to the camera, the intimacy so real it felt like he was reaching across time to touch me. The ranch was a broken place when I was a kid. But I rebuilt it from the ground up for you. Every painting on those walls, every board on that porch, every window I replaced, I did it imagining the way you'd look standing in those rooms. I pressed a hand to my chest where the ache grew heavy. And my brothers, his expression hardened. They'll come for the ranch, Marlene. They'll come fast and they'll come viciously. When the oil companies discovered deposits nearby, they suddenly remembered they cared about the land they mocked me for buying. He paused, breathing slowly. They will lie. They will manipulate. And they will underestimate you. That's your advantage.
The sound of knocking returned sharp, insistent, angry. The brothers weren't leaving.
But Everett spoke again. Everything you need is in the bottom drawer of the desk.
Legally, the ranch is yours alone.
I made sure of it. No matter what they tell you. I fumbled open the drawer with shaking hands. A leather-bound folder sat inside, thick, heavy, labeled simply.
Documents to protect Marlene.
I swallowed hard. Use it if they push you, Everett said gently.
And Marlene, don't be afraid. You are stronger than you think.
Then the video ended. His face froze on the screen, forever smiling, forever out of reach. I wanted to collapse. Instead, I stood taller. The kind of strength that only grief could give was beginning to burn its way through me. Outside, the brothers were speaking loudly again.
The eldest called through the door.
Mrs. Whitford, we have paperwork. You need to let us in.
I wiped my tears.
I breathed. I looked back at Everett's frozen face and whispered, I hear you. Then I opened the leather folder. Inside was a complete legal arsenal: deeds, notarized statements, payment records, geological surveys, And something even more explosive: copies of past financial crimes Everett's brothers had committed to steal their father's estate decades ago. This wasn't just a ranch. This was a line in the sand Everett had drawn before he died. A war he couldn't finish. A war he had handed to me. I closed the folder with new resolve, walked to the front door, and pressed my palm against the wood between me and the men outside. They thought they'd find a confused widow ready to be intimidated. Instead, they found Everett's wife. And that made all the difference. Even now, when the Montana wind shifts just right and rattles the porch railings of Silver Ridge Ranch, I can hear the echo of that day, the day everything twisted in a way I didn't expect. Not from Everett's brothers, no. Their greed was predictable. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly grief could make a smart young woman blind, or how easily loneliness could open the door to the very danger you're trying to keep out. That young woman was my daughter, Lila. She was 28 then, smart as a whip, stubborn like her father, and grieving in a way that made her brittle. Everett had been her compass, her anchor, her North Star. And when he died, the world she'd built around him cracked. I should have seen how vulnerable she was. I should have realized she would reach for anyone offering even a sliver of connection to the father she'd lost. But that day, that terrible day, I was too tangled in Everett's secrets and his warnings to see the next threat forming on the horizon. It began just after sunset. The brothers had finally left the ranch after the RCMP officer told them they had no grounds to force entry. Their SUV disappeared down the dark road, but I knew in my bones they weren't retreating, they were regrouping. I stood alone in the great room, surrounded by the glow of the fireplace and the quiet breath of the horses outside. Everett's laptop sat open on the desk, his face frozen mid-smile in the next video I hadn't yet dared to play. I felt so small then. So exposed. As if Everett had built this magnificent sanctuary but forgotten to include instructions for how to fight an entire family determined to destroy me. My phone vibrated on the table. Lila. Incoming call. I felt my stomach drop. She hadn't called since the funeral except to ask logistical questions about the estate. I wasn't prepared for what happened next. "Mom," she said sharply before I could greet her. "Why didn't you tell me about Dad's ranch?" Her voice wasn't curious or gentle. It was upset. Accusing. Already poisoned. "Lila," I whispered, sinking into the nearest chair, "I just found out myself." "That's not what Dad's brothers said." My breath stopped. "What did they tell you?" "That you're hiding things. That Dad bought the ranch years ago but didn't trust you enough to tell you. They said you're acting irrational and making legal threats." I felt heat rush up my spine. "Lila, they showed up here today unannounced." "I know," she snapped. "Uncle Robert called me afterward. He said you wouldn't even let them in. That you're being defensive because you want to keep everything for yourself." I closed my eyes. There it was. The trap. The hook. The oldest trick in the book. "Lila," I said carefully, "they are not your uncles. They are strangers who want this land." "You're wrong," she insisted, voice rising. "They're Dad's brothers. That makes them family." The word stabbed sharper than I expected. Family. Everett had run from his family. Buried them in silence. And now, in death, they were digging themselves into the heart of the only child he adored. "Mom, they explained everything," she continued breathlessly. "Dad bought the ranch from their father, but it was always meant to be shared. They want to work things out with you, but you're refusing." "Because it's a lie," I said, standing now, my anger finally rising to meet hers. "Everett bought this place secretly because they stole from him. He told me." "He told you nothing." She shot back. "That's the problem. I don't know what to believe anymore." Silence fell between us, heavy as wet snow. I realized then that grief had made us strangers. "You're flying to Montana," she said suddenly.
I booked a flight. I'll be there by morning.
Uncle Robert said he'd pick me up from the airport. My pulse stopped cold.
No, I breathed. No, Lila, you listen to me.
Do not go with them. Do not get in their car. You don't know these men. They're Dad's family, she repeated, as if she was trying to convince herself more than me. And I need answers. The call abruptly ended. I stared at the phone, feeling an old, familiar fear claw its way up the inside of my ribs, the fear of losing her. Not to death, but to manipulation. To lies. To predators wearing the mask of kinship. I turned toward Everett's laptop like a woman reaching for oxygen, and clicked the next video. His face appeared tired, but determined. "If you're watching this, Marlene, they've reached Lila." I gasped out loud. He knew. Of course he knew. He had predicted every step they would take. "Lila is brilliant, but her heart is soft," he said gently. "They'll use that. They will weaponize her grief. And they will try to turn her against you." The tears came fast then, not from sadness, but from rage. From clarity. From the realization that I was standing in the middle of a battle Everett had fought alone for decades. "Your advantage," he continued, "is truth. But you must show it to her, not tell her. She won't believe words, not when hers are being drowned out by theirs." The video ended, but Everett's voice lingered like a hand pressed to my back. "Show her. Not tell her." I wiped my face, squared my shoulders, and walked to the front door. Outside, night was settling across the ranch, deep blue and ferociously quiet. The horses shifted softly in their stalls. The cold Montana air cut through my fear and sharpened me. By morning, Lila would be here. And Everett's brothers would be circling like wolves. I wasn't ready. But I would be. For her. I stayed up the entire night preparing. I reviewed every video Everett left. I organized the legal documents. I highlighted and tabbed evidence. I learned the layout of the ranch. I memorized the history Everett recorded. By dawn, exhaustion had fused with purpose. At 7:12 a.m., I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Through the window, I saw the black SUV return. This time, Lila stepped out. She was smiling. And Everett's brothers flanked her like vultures in Sunday clothes. My heart cracked. But beneath the crack, something hardened. They had taken the first move. Now it was my turn. Lila waved, full of hope I wished I could protect her from. "Mom!" she called cheerfully, already walking toward the porch. "Look who brought me." I stood in the doorway. Not fragile. Not fearful. But ready. Because Everett's videos weren't just messages. They were armor. And I was about to use every piece of it. I don't think I'll ever forget the expression on Lila's face when she stepped out of that black SUV, hopeful, eager, almost radiant. It was the way she used to look at Everett when she was little, as if the world were suddenly less frightening because someone strong was walking beside her. Seeing that same look now, directed at three men who viewed her as nothing more than a pawn, sent a sharp, protective ache through my chest. She hurried up the porch steps before I could speak, wrapping her arms around me. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough for me to recognize the grief underneath the bravado. "They've been helping me understand everything. You didn't have to face this alone." Helping. That word lodged itself under my ribs like a nail. The brothers followed behind her in a loose triangle, Robert in front, tall and polished like a corporate lion. Alan just behind, holding a leather portfolio like it was his shield, and the youngest, Thomas, hands in his pockets, eyes darting around the ranch as if calculating every visible asset. Robert stepped forward with a smile that never touched his eyes. "Marlene, he said with feigned warmth. Thank you for letting us bring Lila safely to you. It's time we all talked. I looked past him at Lila. Did they tell you I asked you not to go with them? Her cheeks colored. Mom, they're family. They're Everett's past, I corrected. Not your family. Before she could respond, Robert gestured toward the doorway. Shall we? He said, as if my home were his meeting room. I didn't want them inside. But if Everett's videos had taught me anything, it was this.
You win nothing by running.
You win by letting your opponent overplay their hand. So I stepped back, allowing them inside, not because they were welcome but because it was time to get this over with. The moment they saw the great room, all pretenses slipped. Their eyes raked over the vaulted ceiling, the polished beams, the artwork, the newly restored fireplace, the unmistakable signs of money. Robert's jaw tightened. Alan's pupils dilated. Thomas exhaled an appreciative whistle he tried to hide. This place, he murmured. It's worth
Whatever Everett built it to be, I cut in.
Nothing more. Nothing less. Robert cleared his throat, reclaiming whatever sense of authority he thought he had.
Marlene, let's sit.
There are documents we'd like to show you.
Documents?
Of course. The leather portfolio opened with a crisp snap as the men took their seats around Everett's handcrafted oak table. Lila sat beside them, her posture straight, her chin raised as if preparing to defend them. I remained standing. Alan slid a stack of papers toward me. This, he said in the tone of a man accustomed to boardrooms and intimidation, is our mutual settlement proposal. It divides the ranch into equitable shares. Equitable, I repeated, tasting the word like something rotten. I lifted the first page with 2 fingers. Anyone without Everett's foresight might have been fooled. A map was sketched out showing the ranch divided into 3 equal zones. The brothers would receive the northern and western sections, almost 80% of the acreage. I would keep the main house and surrounding 200 acres. It looked fair to someone who knew nothing. To someone who didn't know what Everett had discovered.
To someone without the hidden files in the underground bunker.
But I wasn't that someone. The western acres they claimed were rocky and useless. They held the largest oil deposit in the region. The brothers were trying to carve out the heart of the land right in front of me, smiling while doing it. I placed the papers back on the table without reading the next page. Did you tell Lila about the oil? I asked quietly. I watched their expressions flicker too quickly to be noticed by untrained eyes, but not quick enough to escape mine. We told her, Robert said smoothly, that this land has potential, yes. That's one word for it, I replied. Another is jackpot. Lila frowned.
Mom Don, T-start.
Before I could answer, the sound of footsteps approached from the back of the house. Ellis appeared in the doorway steady, calm, soil still clinging to the knees of his work jeans from his morning rounds. He nodded politely to Lila. Then he glanced at the brothers with a look that could curdle milk. Everything all right here? He asked, voice neutral but ready. Robert bristled. We're conducting family business.
If you don't mind.
I do mind, I said sharply. Ellis stays. The brothers exchanged looks, clearly annoyed. Alan leaned back in his chair. Marlene, we're trying to prevent unnecessary legal conflict. You're a retired teacher with limited resources. This ranch is worth millions. Litigation could drain you dry. There it was, the thinly veiled threat. I felt something inside me snap, not from fear, but from the memory of Everett's voice in the last video I'd watched. They'll use intimidation first. Remain calm. They crumble when you stop being afraid. I walked to the desk, retrieved Everett's blue folder, and returned to the table. Lila watched me with wary curiosity. "What's that?" she asked. "Truth," I said, placing it beside their stack of lies. "Would you like to hear your father's truth, or theirs?" Alan smirked. "Marlene, falsified documents aren't." "These aren't falsified," I cut him off.
"And you know it."
I slid a single sheet toward Lila. It was a notarized statement from Everett confirming the purchase of the ranch, the dates, the payments, the condition of the property, and most importantly the terms of sale made with their father. Lila scanned it, her brow furrowing. "Dad bought this place legally," she murmured. "Of course he did," I replied.
The brothers stiffened.
But I wasn't done. I pulled out another document, this one not just a blow, but a fatal strike, a series of financial records showing how the brothers had drained their father's accounts years before, forging Everett's name on withdrawals and investment authorizations. Illegal.
Tres Ebel.
Stamped and certified. Alan's hand twitched. Thomas stopped breathing. Robert attempted a smile that wobbled at the corners. "Marlene," he said softly, "let's not revisit old misunderstandings." "Is that what we're calling financial fraud now?" I asked. Lila's face lost its color. "Uncle Robert," she whispered, "is this true?" He opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. "We were young," he tried. "Your father was always dramatic." "Dramatic?" I repeated. "He left the entire country to escape you. He changed his legal name. He never contacted you again. That's not drama.
That is survival."
For the first time since they arrived, the brothers looked truly shaken, realizing, perhaps too late, that Everett had armed me with more than deeds and surveys. He had armed me with the truth they'd spent decades burying. Robert stood abruptly, pacing as if the room had shrunk around him. "This isn't over," he muttered. "No," I agreed, "it's not." I walked to the corner of the room, picked up the remote, and pressed a button. A hidden projector descended from the ceiling, clicking into place.
Lila blinked. The brothers stared.
"Dad set this up," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "He wanted you to see what kind of men you're calling family." And I pressed play. Everett appeared on the screen alive, speaking, looking straight into the soul of the daughter he'd died loving. "Lila, sweetheart, if my brothers are at the ranch with you, then they've begun the game they always play. But you need to understand, they do not want connection. They want control. And they will use you if you let them." Lila covered her mouth with both hands as Everett continued, his tone soft but unflinching.
"Please listen to your mother.
She is the one person in this room who loves you without agenda."
Silence filled the great room like a thundercloud.
The brothers stared at the frozen screen, their faces a carefully controlled mixture of embarrassment and rage. Lila looked at Miralai, looked at Mefa the first time since arriving. And I saw the walls begin to crumble. "Mom," she whispered, voice cracking. I walked to her, cupped her face, and pressed my forehead gently to hers. "Lila, your father built this place for us. Not them." Behind us, one of the brothers slammed his hand on the table.
"This is manipulation."
"No," I said, turning slowly.
"This is Everett.
And you underestimate him even in death." I pointed to the door.
"You re-leaving.
Now."
Robert's face twisted.
"If you think." Ellis stepped closer, his solid frame casting a long shadow. "You heard her." The three brothers hesitated. Not long. Just long enough to reveal fear. Then they gathered their papers, the lies, the half-truths, the threats, and walked out the front door of the ranch as the wind picked up behind them. Lila watched them go, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. When the SUV finally disappeared down the long dirt road, she sank into a chair. "Oh God," she whispered. Dad knew them better than I ever could. I placed a hand on her shoulder. And he knew you'd need the truth delivered gently enough to hear it, but firmly enough to understand it. She took a long, trembling breath. Mom, I'm so sorry. I pulled her into my arms. Don't apologize, I whispered. Just stay with me. We're not done yet. And I was right. Because the brothers' defeat that day wasn't the end of the battle. It was the beginning of the war they never expected us to win. People assume that once you expose a predator, they retreat into the shadows they crawled out from. But predators don't give up that easily, not when they're desperate, not when they're cornered, not when they smell something they believe belongs to them. Everett's brothers were no different. After the confrontation that shattered their facade in front of Lila, I naively believed they would slink away, lick their wounds, and find another target to devour. For a while, the ranch felt calm, Montana winter sweeping across the pastures like a white sheet pulled over a restless body. The horses grew thicker coats, the pines bowed under frost, and the air developed the rhythmic hush of deep cold. Days passed. Then weeks. I allowed myself to breathe again. But winter has a way of exposing what the world tried to bury.
Snow softens nothing. It simply hides jagged things until the sun strikes just right.
And that early January morning, the sun struck harshly. I had just finished brushing down midnight the proud Frisian Everett had bought for Mewhen. I heard gravel crunching in the distance. The sound didn't match Ellis's truck or the ranch hand's schedules. It was slow, deliberate, almost rehearsed. I walked to the stable doorway. 2 vehicles idled at the gate. A black SUV. And a smaller gray sedan. My pulse picked up instantly, scraping old fear to the surface. Ellis walked up behind me and followed my gaze. It's them, he said quietly. No surprise. Just resignation. They're early, I murmured. Early for what? He asked. I swallowed. For whatever new scheme they've invented.
We walked back to the house together.
My breath fogged in front of me, curling like smoke from an extinguished fire. Everett's videos had taught me many things. By them: prepare, anticipate, never let emotion precede strategy. So by the time Ellis opened the front door, my hands no longer shook. The brothers entered with a strange mix of arrogance and caution. This time they didn't bark demands, didn't wave legal threats, didn't pretend they came for reconciliation. They came with something worse: appeal. Robert looked thinner than before, his complexion gray and oddly waxy. Alan hovered close, carrying a portfolio under his arm. The youngest brother, Thomas, kept glancing at the man behind them, a stranger holding a medical bag. A doctor. I felt the room tilt slightly. Robert cleared his throat. Marlene, thank you for seeing us. I didn't respond. Instead, I studied his face. He looked sick. Truly sick. Not manipulative sick, but physically failing. Still, sympathy doesn't erase history. You have 10 minutes, I said. Robert nodded, lowered himself onto the couch, and placed shaking palms on his knees. I've been diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, he began softly. The same condition that killed our father. The same that took Everett. I stayed silent. He swallowed hard.
It is advanced.
His voice wavered for the first time since I met him. Without intervention, he continued, I have months. I didn't flinch.
Grief teaches you how to stand still. The doctor stepped forward.
We're here today because Mr. Whitford needs a donor match. A partial liver transplant would extend his life considerably.
With your permission, we'd like to test your daughter, Lila. The room froze.
Ellis stiffened beside me. My hand found the back of a chair because I needed something solid to hold on to. The audacity.
The gall. The breathtaking entitlement.
The same men who tried to manipulate her, deceive me, steal the ranch, forge documents, and smear Everett's name now wanted my daughter's body as their salvation. It would have been humorous if it weren't so sinister. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. You want my daughter to undergo medical testing and potentially major surgery for a man she met less than a week ago. A man who's spent his life trying to destroy the father she adored. Alan interjected quickly. It's not that simple. Family members have the highest compatibility. She is not your family, I snapped.
She is Everett's child. Robert leaned forward. Marlene, please.
His voice wasn't aggressive. It was pleading. And somehow that made me trust him even less. You don't understand, he continued. We've already tested my brothers. Neither is compatible. Then try someone else, I said. There is no one else. Thomas blurted.
I raised my chin.
I knew something they didn't know. Everett had left me a sealed letter for Robert. A letter he'd written precisely for a moment like this one he had predicted with unsettling accuracy. I hadn't delivered it yet. I wasn't sure I ever wanted to. But now?
Now the moment demanded it.
I went to the drawer under Everett's desk, retrieved the envelope, and held it up. I believe, I said, you should read this before making another request of me or my daughter. Robert frowned, took the envelope, and slipped a finger under the seal. He read silently. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to horror.
Alan snatched the letter next.
Then Thomas read over his shoulder. Their faces drained in near unison, as if the truth inside Everett's words siphoned the last drop of confidence from their veins. Finally, Robert asked, voice raspy, "Did you know?" "I only know what Everett left me," I replied. The doctor looked confused, unsure whether to stay or leave. The brothers seemed to forget he existed. Robert braced a trembling hand on the armrest. "Our father," he said thickly, "had 2 other children. Half-siblings. Our half-siblings.
In Saskatchewan.
Our mother didn't die giving birth to Everett. She left. He remarried. Then he had 2 more children." He let out a breath that seemed to collapse the man from the inside. And according to this, he lifted Everett's letter with twitching fingers. Those siblings inherited the same rare blood markers as the rest of us. "Meaning," I said gently but firmly, "you have 2 potential donor matches who share your genetics."
Not my daughter.
Silence pressed down on us like a weighted blanket. Alan closed his eyes. Thomas wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Robert stared at the floor, sinking deeper into himself. Finally, he whispered, "Why didn't Everett tell us?" "I didn't sugarcoat it. Because you would have used them the same way you just tried to use Lila."
Robert's throat barbed.
"For once," he murmured, "I wish you were wrong." The doctor cleared his throat awkwardly.
"Mr.
Whitford, we should contact these individuals immediately." Alan nodded numbly. "Yes. Yes, of course. We'll start there." I folded my hands in front of me. "If they refuse," I said evenly, "the decision for Lila will still be hers, not yours. Not mine. Hers alone." They didn't argue. For the first time since Everett died, they didn't challenge a single word I said. They stood slowly, as if their bodies had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Before leaving, Robert paused at the door. He turned back. His voice was hollow.
"Marlene, thank you.
Even if you never forgive us." I didn't respond. Some men mistake politeness for forgiveness. I watched them walk down the porch steps, the snow crunching under their feet like brittle bones. When the cars disappeared beyond the trees, Ellis turned to me. "You think they'll contact the half-siblings?" he asked. Yes, I said quietly. Because for the first time in their lives, they're out of options. He nodded, then added,
And what about you? How do you feel?
I looked out toward the frozen fields, the cold blue mountains, the horses grazing in the distance. I feel, I said slowly, like Everett hasn't finished saving us yet. And even though the house was silent, I swear I could almost hear him.
A whisper carried by the winter wind.
A reminder. A promise.
A guiding hand. The war wasn't over.
But the battlefield had shifted. And for the first time,
the brothers weren't the ones holding the advantage.
Whenever winter breaks in Montana, it doesn't happen gently. It happens suddenly, like the land takes one enormous breath after months of holding it in. Snow melts in great sheets. Rivers swell. Pines shake off their icy coats.
The earth exhales.
And that spring, the first spring after Everett's death, the ranch changed with the same violent resolve I felt inside myself. What I didn't understand then was that the thaw wasn't only happening around me. It was happening within me. The woman I'd been for decades, the quiet Minnesota schoolteacher, the soft-spoken wife who hated conflict, the woman who stayed in the shadow of her husband's gentleness, she didn't fit here anymore. She had served her purpose. She had kept the marriage warm, the home peaceful, the years predictable. But Everett had left me a different life. A bigger one. A harder one.
A truer one.
And whether he intended to or not, he left me with one final choice. Stay the woman I had been. Or become the woman he always believed I could be. I chose the latter. Not all at once, not even consciously, but piece by piece. It began with the videos. Every morning, before the sun rose, before the horses stirred, before Ellis started checking the fences or the ranch hands rolled in, I sat in the art studio Everett built for me and let his face fill the screen.
The video on day 46 still cracks something fragile in me every time I remember it.
He sat in the unfinished library, dust on his jeans, sunlight cutting across his shoulders. Marlene, if you're watching this one, I think you've finally started painting again. He smiled so softly it made my throat tighten. I knew it would take time. You'd hesitate, overthink, convince yourself you were too old or too rusty. But I also knew the moment your hand touched that brush, something in you would wake up. I looked over at the easel beside me, then at the half-finished portrait of Midnight I'd been working on. He'd been right. Painting felt like remembering a language I had once spoken fluently.
A language I thought I'd forgotten.
But Everett had remembered for me. In another video, he talked about the land. In another, about grief. In another, about fear. But the one that took root deepest was the video where he spoke about legacy. People think legacy is about money or land or bloodlines, he said, sitting on the edge of the porch at sunset. But real legacy is possibility. The possibilities you create for someone else.
The ones you leave behind.
I paused the video and whispered, "You gave me too much of that, Everett. What am I supposed to do with all of it?" His answer came a few minutes later in the same recording.
You grow into it.
Even if it scares you. Especially if it scares you. I didn't realize then how much he meant that literally.
Because the brothers weren't gone.
Not yet. Not forever. They resurfaced after a month, this time with emails from their attorneys requesting updated geological assessments and formal notifications about boundary clarifications.
Nothing hostile. Nothing overt.
But I knew what it really was. They were circling. Waiting. Measuring.
I forwarded every document to my attorney.
But my heart no longer clenched when I saw their names. Fear had been replaced with something else. Competence. Confidence. Power. That was Everett's doing, not through force, but through knowledge. Knowledge he left me in hundreds of videos. Knowledge he built into that bunker beneath the old barn. Ellis began calling the bunker the War Room, half joking at first. But eventually the name stuck, because it was impossible to deny. Everett had fought a war against his brothers his entire life. He just hadn't lived long enough to win it. So he handed the battlefield to me. And I was finally ready to fight. One afternoon in early spring, I heard laughter outside the window. Lila's laughter. It had been so long since I'd heard her sound genuinely happy. She was brushing the Appaloosa mare Everett had chosen for her, telling the horse a story about her job back in Minneapolis and how her boss kept messing up the client budget. I watched her for a while, leaning against the studio window frame. She hadn't moved back to Montana permanently, but she visited every month and stayed longer each time. When she noticed me in the window, she grinned.
"You re-spying on me?"
"Just admiring you," I replied. "It's good to hear you laugh." Her smile softened.
"I feel closer to Dad here," she murmured. "And closer to you."
For a moment, the air thickened with something warm and painful. Guilt. Forgiveness. Healing. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm sorry for how I handled everything when I first came. I wanted connection so badly I didn't realize I was grabbing at barbed wire."
I stepped outside, boots crunching softly on the gravel.
"You aren't to blame," I said, stopping beside her. "Grief makes us reach blindly." She nodded. Then, quietly, "Do you think Dad knew we'd both have to become stronger versions of ourselves?"
I exhaled slowly.
"Yes," I answered. "I think that's exactly why he built all this." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Good," she whispered. "Because I'm ready to help you now." And she meant it. From that day forward, she became my second backbone. She attended meetings with Western Plains Energy, asking questions I didn't think to ask. She helped organize the financial documents Everett had left behind. She even volunteered to ride out with Ellis when he inspected the Western Hill Trails. Which meant that when Everett's brothers made their final attempt, she wasn't the weak spot they once thought she was. She was a shield. Their final attempt came in the form of a letter. A simple envelope, slipped under the gate, with my name handwritten across it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No threats. No legal jargon.
No accusations. Just a request.
A sincere apology from Robert. An admission of guilt. A thank you for giving him the information that saved his life.
And a promise to never interfere with the ranch again.
He wrote that the half-siblings had indeed responded. One agreed to testing. One did not. But the willing one turned out to be a match. Robert had already undergone the transplant evaluation process. He ended the letter with something unexpected. Everett was a better man than any of us deserved. Protect what he gave you. He would want that. I read the letter 3 times.
Not because I trusted it,
but because it was the closest thing to grace those men were ever capable of giving. And maybe just maybe was enough. I folded it, tucked it away in the war room, and walked outside. The sky that day was impossibly wide, the kind of blue that seems to tilt the world upward. The horses grazed lazily along the fence line.
The mountains rose in the distance like old guards watching over the land.
I closed my eyes and breathed in the cool spring air. For the first time since Everett's death, I felt peace settle over me.
Not the fragile kind. Not the temporary kind. A sturdy peace.
A peace I had earned. Inside the house, the next video waited on Everett's laptop. I opened it. He was sitting on the porch swing this time, the golden hour painting his face in warm light. If you're watching this one, Marlene, then I think you've finally found your footing. I smiled. I knew you would, he continued softly. You were always stronger than you believed. I wasn't preparing you to survive without me. I was preparing you to become who you were meant to be. He chuckled lightly. And I imagine by now, you've discovered that my brothers can't beat you.
Not because you ruthless,
but because you're steady.
And steady people build things the world can tear down.
I wiped a tear that slipped down without my permission. He leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping to a whisper.
Life, Marlene.
Really live. Paint.
Ride. Fight when you must. Love when you can.
And know that nothing I left behind was ever meant to trap you. Everything was meant to free you. The video ended. But the truth in his words did not. Months later, when summer rolled in like a warm tide, the ranch no longer felt like a burden or a battlefield. It felt like home. The oil agreement became a model of responsible extraction for the region praised in local newspapers. The horses thrived. The studio bloomed with paintings hung on the walls like little rebirths. Lila began dating a local veterinarian who adored horses as much as she did. They weren't serious yet, but the sparkle in her eyes when she talked about him was enough to make my heart swell. As for me, I didn't remarry. I didn't need to.
Some loves stand alone enough to fill a lifetime.
Everett had left me land. Security.
Artikel.
Strength. A daughter who found her way back. But most of all, he left me myself, a version of me I didn't know existed. A version strong enough to fight, soft enough to heal, wise enough to choose peace without mistaking it for weakness. One evening, just before sunset, I hung my largest painting in the great room. It was the portrait Everett once asked me to create. Not a picture of him.
Not a memorial.
Not a shrine. But a landscape of the ranch, how it looked the morning I first arrived and the day everything changed. Layers of past and present merged, showing what the land had been and what it had become. At the center stood two horses, Midnight and the Appaloosa, gazing toward the western hills. And walking beside them, hand in hand, were two figures. Not detailed. Not literal. Just shapes.
Shadows.
Possibilities. One was Everett. One was me. But the future stretching ahead of them, that part belonged to no one but me. I stepped back, let the colors settle into the walls, and whispered to the empty room. Thank you, Everett.
Not for the ranch. Not for the war.
Not even for the love. But for believing in a version of me I had never dared to imagine. And now, thanks to him, I was living it.
Every single day.